Welcome to a conversation with Alan Questrom, master retailer and graduate of Boston University School of Management, class of 1964. I'm Ken Freeman, Alan Questrom Professor and Dean at the School of Management. And Alan, we're very, very pleased to have you with us today. Perhaps in getting started in this conversation, could you take us back and tell us, when did retailing become your passion?
The question is, when did it become my passion? Was once I got into it. But back in those days, Boston University had a retailing course, which is an elective course. And I elected it because I had some extra spare time. And I was fortunate enough to have as then the Professor Beckworth. And Professor Beckworth was I would not call him a fashion maven, but he certainly was a retailer who really loved it. And he was a very, very enthusiastic, very kind of a person who really believed in his students and wanted to help them and encourage them. And so I was fortunate that I had that class, and he was very involved in what I did in the class and asked lots of questions and complimented me many times. But that's not what I wanted to do. I did not want to be in the retail business. That's not my vision of what I was going to be as I got older. What I really wanted to be is I wanted to be a ski instructor.
Wonderful.
So when I graduated from school, actually when I graduated from school, I worked on the golf course because I also liked to play golf. And when winter came, I went up to Vermont to become a ski instructor. Well, that year we had very, very little snow. And so come Christmas time, I came back home and I get a call from Professor Beckworth. And he wanted to know what I was doing. And I said, look, I'm becoming a ski instructor. He says, look, how can you be a ski instructor? There's no snow. And I said, well, there will be snow. And this is now December 26th or 27th. He said, well, I'll tell you what I've done. I figure you may be on vacation, so I've arranged for a couple of interviews for you in Boston and in New York at some retail companies. So I said, I don't really want to do that. He said, well, what else are you doing? You got nothing else to do. What's the thing? You spend a day, you go down to New York, and it takes you two minutes, you'll see these people. So I did. And one of the companies down there, Abraham and Strauss at the time, which is now Macy's, had a training program. This is a Friday, had a training program starting on Monday. And they said, we have a program, and Professor Beckworth had called that you were coming. And would you like to join that? I said, no, I'm really interested in something in the spring. We're not interested in spring right now. We're only focusing on filling this class. So I said, well, let me think about it. So I go and have a cup of coffee and say, well, look, I haven't got skiing now, so maybe I could live in New York. It would be interesting to live in New York. It's certainly different from where I'm living now. So I come back, I say, okay, I'll take it. So that's Friday. I drive all the way back to Boston in my little Volkswagen. And that Saturday, we had the biggest snowstorm of the year, 2 feet of snow. But I already committed to my coming. And so on my way back, I'm swearing all the way back, saying, one day I'm going to do what I wanted to do to begin with. And that's how my career began. But once I got into the business, and I think this is true with most every business, is that if you don't get in the door, I don't care what the job is, if you don't get there, you're not going to be able to see what the opportunities are in that business and learn about that business, but also see people in the business and get some experience from that. And that's how I started, and I was fortunate enough to be associated with a lot of very interesting people, challenging people, and people that I learned from. And early on, because I had this retail experience from that class, I knew more of the jargon than all the other trainees. So because of that, recognized early on that I knew something. Now, it was very little, but things in those days as it is today, sometimes things can be very superficial. So that's how I started, and because of the people I work with and the kind of role they set and how they viewed the retail business, that's how I got encouraged to stay in it.
And were there any special, shall we say, defining moments for you along the path? Clearly, having served as CEO of so many well-known, famous global brands, along the way, what helped in that preparation to become a CEO and lead organizations to success? Well,
one of the things when I started in the business, when I started, I was on this training program, but I early on got selected to be the assistant to the executive vice president. So he was kind of introducing me around and showing me different things. And I liked change. So I got promoted, and I had an opportunity to change. And I got to a certain point at that company, I thought it was going to be a long time before I got the next step. So I said, I'm going to go, and somebody called to see if I'd be interested in a job at a next level up and in another company. And so I came back. I said, you know, I got this opportunity to go to work for a competitor. And they said, well, we got a job for you better than that, but it's in California. So here's an opportunity to go to California. So and it was a company that had trouble out there. And so I went to work in the same company and then I did different jobs along the way. So I was learning along the way how to untangle problems. And I got over time to be pretty good at figuring out what the problem is and how to change it. And it was interesting that since I worked in different corporations as time went on, I got to see that the problems were very similar. That the problem gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And what basically the problem was people are internally looking. They're always looking, and the problem is you, or you, but not me. And they spend very little time studying the competition outside, understanding how am I going to make my business that I'm in better by trying to figure out what other people are doing better than me. And so I spent an awful lot of time of looking out and looking to see who's doing something better than me, whether it would be in my company in another division that was doing something well or better, and trying to incorporate those into our vocabulary, and the same with on the outside. And I found that every business that I went into that was in trouble, they all had the same internal focus. They were not looking at what was being done better than they were doing. They were talking about that guy is doing it wrong, but I'm doing it right. And that's a big problem that I think not only in the retail business, but it's true in the automobile industry, it's true in education, and so on. So,
is there one particular CEO role that you assumed that you feel stands out as extra special from your standpoint?
No, I thought, you know, I was a CEO of 4 different companies. As I said, they all had similar problems. I liked working with them all. The other common denominator was that all 4 of these companies had very good people working in them. The problem generally was the CEO and management, and that was very consistent. And so I didn't have any single one, and each one though built on my wardrobe of skills, because each one had a little different problem, but the basic core problems were the same.
So turnarounds, as we know, are very difficult to pull off. Your track record is flawless, many different kinds of circumstances. Did you have a process or an approach you used to get an organization aligned, move them forward, make change happen?
Yes. One of the things that I did, and I think people who do that, you really have to spend some time, and I used to always set aside in my mind 3 months' time to understand what's the strength of this company, and try to understand the history of the company and what their skills were, and what's changed over the last several years to make this company not perform well. And what I generally would do is I would try to determine in that 3 months, what are the 2 or 3, maximum 5 issues that we were going to focus on in that company. And I would put that down on a piece of paper, one page, and I would talk to our people about that. And I said, now when we talk together again, I want you to tell me what you're doing on those 5 issues. I don't want you to talk all these other issues. I want you to talk about these are the 5 issues, because we as a company are going to have to work on those issues together so that we maximize those 5 issues, and we'll maximize them by the most people in the company working on the same things. And so that was a very simple formula. And when people would come in, and I'd say, well, what about those 5 issues? And they knew that we were going to talk about those 5 issues and what they had done in there. Now, what did you see in those 5 issues when you shopped at some of your competition that they were doing better on those issues? And so it was a constant play on that. But again, it was getting people to focus in on 3 or 4 things were going to make a difference.
And the metrics you might have used, were there quantitative metrics and others that you linked to the focus?
We had quantitative measurements in the performance of the business, whether it was sales performance or margin improvements or many, many different issues we look at. But we really took, number 1 issue is how to move the top line. Mm-hmm. because the top line was a top line being top line sales, was about, are your customers seeing this, and as a result, are they buying into it? Then to make money on that, that was the next step. But it was first to get the people into the store or into the department and make it work, and then you figure out how to make money by your expense issues. But if you didn't get the people into the store, you could do all the expense work, not going to make any difference.
Now, J.C. Penney, a legendary company, you went into the company after it was, I believe, more than 100 years
Not 99
old.
years old.
99 years old when you arrived. That must have been a very unique, special situation, and also very much a family-controlled company for many, many decades.
Well, the family had long gone. He left early. He left when he was 37 years old, but he was, he was very influential at the time. Not too differently than Walmart, in the sense that it was very inspired by the founder. In fact, Mr. Walton worked at Penney's, and Mr. Penney's had a philosophy about the customer, and that was very much embedded in the people in terms of the slogans in the wall. Problem is that they just weren't following it. They would talk about
customers
him,
number one,
but that wasn't what they focused on. And they had not, again, the company, again, was 100 years old, but they were also about 25 years behind the time. And they had not centralized their systems, and they had 900 stores at the time, and they all did their own buying, they did their own receiving and marketing, and stores for 20 years, companies had been centralized that for a long time. So they weren't competitive on a cost-wise, and they weren't competitive on the merchandise-wise, because their people weren't as good as the people buying big lots, because they had much more relationship with bigger vendors, and so they were much more localized, and they just weren't as competitive in terms of their product or their cost structure.
So you went in there and
so we went in there,
respected the past, but at the very same time,
well, we respected the past, being who is the customer at Penney's? Who has been the customer? What has changed around them? And what do we need to do to make that equation now competitive for that customer, or customers that are now no longer shopping in our store? And one of the things when you go into a company, you really have to, and this is the problem that Penney's has had recently, you can't just go in because of your experience at another company that's totally unrelated and think, well, this worked there, I'm going to make it work here. Because that may be a totally different customer. In the case of Penney's, recently they had brought somebody in who'd been very successful, supposedly, at Apple. But you got to put that success in perspective. They talk about how great the retail stores were at Gap, but the fact is it wasn't the retail stores, it was the product that Gap had developed under Mr. Jobs, which is basically the iPad, the iPhone, the iPod, and the computer. You could have had a cart horse with those three products, and you had done very well. But now, it's not, but saying that, he did design some very, very interesting stores. But again, that's a different customer than the Penney customer. That doesn't mean they wouldn't have bought an iPhone, but they were generally not a contemporary, modern customer. Yeah. They were people who were middle America.
And did you, I know that a lot of the popular press suggests that the most recent attempt to transform J.C. Penney under this gentleman's leadership was such that he made a big decision without testing the concept. We learn often in school, business school, the concept of you build one, you make sure it works, and then is that
right? Yeah, and every time, whenever you're doing something like that, you get 900 stores. You don't decide you're going to change them all without trying one of them out. And he felt that one of the things he had learned from Steve Jobs is you don't test market. You just know what the right thing to do, and you do it. That's different in that business. You know, your competition is relatively, it's broad, but in terms of product, you say, I know this iPad is a great looking product compared to anything else in the market, and I believe it's going to work. Now, it could fail, but you also weren't a big company that already had many, many customers that were coming back and forth. And so I think you have to put the perspective that you have to understand, why is my product, why is my business different than the business I just came from. Now, I came out of retail. He actually did come out of retail. He had worked for Mervyn's and Target, but he worked at a much lower level. Yeah. And so that was his first job as a CEO. And I really feel that in that particular case that he was the problem, but the board was a bigger problem. The board did not get into challenge what he was going to do, and what happens if it's wrong? What do we do then? You know, what's
the backup plan?
What's our backup plan? And they didn't do that, and as a result, he put them almost into bankruptcy.
Leadership, you're acknowledged and recognized as an icon of retail. How would others describe your leadership style? Folks that may have worked with you along the way.
I would say I ask a lot of questions, and so I'm a questioner. I force people to look at the facts. So we go out and look at stores, and so I would visit stores. We would visit competition. I'd ask, give me your feedback on what you saw. What do you think they're doing better than us? Don't tell me what we're doing better than them. Tell us what we think we can learn from them. And that I've studied the business pretty well. So when I'm asking questions, I want to make sure you have looked at the question. I would say I give them plenty of responsibility. I don't nickel and dime them on issues, but once I have a comfort level that they've done their homework, I give them a lot of leeway to go about and do that.
And the core skills you're looking for in individuals, you say, this person is going to be a leader in my organization, has the potential to grow. What are those core skills?
Well, those cores generally are basically on it's looking at the various jobs that they're doing and how well they handle those jobs, how they manage people, how they manage that business, how they manage their finances. And so you would never take a person at the lower level and just promote him up without looking at the various jobs he's had. So we had a very good review process in terms of our annualized reviews, in terms of strengths and weaknesses. You're the boss of that person. Who do you see in your organization that are promotable to the next level? So we had a process that wasn't just me. It was a way to go through the organization and try to determine who are the people that are going to be promoted in the next way. We didn't have a job open that we weren't already prepared with backup people. And so we had, I think, a very good human resource process that really made sure that we filled it out. And if we felt we had a weakness there, we would be on the lookout for people on the outside who would fill. And we like to have every once in a while people come in on the outside who would be bringing in new ideas to us doing business.
The most difficult decision you've had to make as a leader?
Well, it's closing a store or closing a business or going out of a business. Those are always, because when you're involving people and the effects it's going to be on them and their families' lives, it's a big responsibility you have. And I think the same responsibility is why I liked turnarounds, is that you get a business turned around, it's positive, it's now creating jobs. And it's also seeing people see their success, because when people see a business turn around, they see their part played, the part that they played in that. And so I would say that's always the biggest problem, is when you have to close a business or eliminate somebody in the company that you like, but you just don't think it's always a people issue, I think, that's the toughest.
Do you have any regrets from all your time as a great leader? Anything you wish you might have done differently, as an example?
You know, we always second guess ourselves, but I look at the overall. My sense was when I went into a company, my goal was that company was going to be better when I left, and that the true test would be, is it still doing well 2 or 3 years later, and is the organization stronger today with a mission, clear mission that they want to accomplish, and that usually carries on. That's no guarantee. That's the problem you have in companies, is that problems in companies are top leaders, and so if you make a mistake on the leader, or if you don't have one that's, if I'd say big mistake I had, when I left Penney's, we really didn't have somebody internally, and so the board went outside and we picked somebody that probably wasn't the best for the, and this wasn't Johnson, this was before Johnson. So that's always a case when you do leave, you've got to make sure. But that was, I'd say that would always be the biggest decision.
Retailing, many would say, is undergoing a revolution. Driven in part by the role of information technology, online, and what have you. What's your sense in terms of where retailing's heading in a time of certainly disruption? How do you see things evolving? Well,
retailing, and I think all businesses are always going through change, and I'd say the internet is playing a big role in it. It is not the role of retailing. It's playing a role in it, and I think what you're seeing is there'll not be in my day that where stores get eliminated because people are going to buy it on the internet. But I do think that the internet, as people learn how to use it better, it allows you to expand the customer's appreciation. So they oftentimes look up a product on their iPhone or their iPad, they do research on it, and then they go in the store and shop and buy it. Most people, and I'd say it's probably for most stores, it's somewhat less than 10% of their business comes out of the internet. And it's very difficult to try to define it, because did they buy this based on their research in the internet, or did they go into the store and then go back and buy it on there? I think that you look at Amazon, they certainly have, I think it's about an $80 billion company today. They have certainly made people think about the internet differently. Now remember that Amazon still doesn't make any money.
Yeah.
So one day when somebody starts holding them accountable, but one of the things that people give them lots of credit, look at the huge growth they've had over this last 20 some odd years. But you don't have to worry about money. That's pretty good. But he has done some very creative things in retailing, and he started out with books, and he saw that that was going to be one opportunity that may not be his only, and so he started using the concepts and the successes. So, you know, everything is changing. And, you know, when I started in business in 1965, Walmart started 3 years earlier in 1962. Walmart today, it's just celebrated its 50th birthday. That's $450 billion, $470 billion. I think the whole department store industry today is less than $70 billion. So that's, and most every department store is over 100 years old. So, and he basically is a department store, because he's got more different businesses in there than most department stores today. So I think it's the thing that, and I think this is true whether you're in the auto industry or in education, if you're not constantly aware of the consumers changing and what's changing her out there, and you're not constantly staying on top of that, then you will become part of the past. And whether, again, it's autos, as we talk about what's going to happen in the auto industry, is it going to go to electric? Is it who knows? You have to be there watching it. Now, I quite frankly was one who believed that internet was not going to be overnight, and I said it's something we needed to be very aware of, very studied on it, but let's not invest a lot of money in it until we really understand where it's going to go. And that, I think, is over. That's now 25 years later, so it's really now become a much bigger deal. But the money that's been spent on it and the numbers of failures that have been in it are much greater than what the profits have been out of it. So.
Now, ethical dilemmas. We all face them in professional settings. Is there a particular circumstance that you can recall as we strive to help make sure our students, when they leave as graduates, that they have a grounding in informed judgment? Is there an ethical dilemma that you might have faced along the way where you had a tough decision to make? Maybe why did you make the decision? What were the pressures you felt? What did you learn from this?
You know, I think we grow up, hopefully in our families, where we learn very early on right and wrong. And, you know, I think that I had one time, it was just a small issue, but I remember we had, when I was at Neiman Marcus, we had the largest fur business in the country. And we had a very, very successful person running that. But at one point in time, it came to my attention that he had taken back used furs and reconditioned them and sold them as new. And we found out about it, and there had been about 20 of them. It was about a couple $100,000. And we obviously terminated the person, but we then wanted to make sure we got those furs back. And because I did not want to have a fur that was not new and was sold as new out in somebody's hands. And I remember us calling these people to ask them if we could buy it back because it was sold by mistake. And they thought we were trying to take something that was worth something. We didn't want to tell them that it had been sold by an error, because we wanted to get it back and not have a thing. And so that was one of the little issues that you said, look, they never knew about it, but it was one of those kind of things when you know something is wrong. Now, that is not like building a product that you know is going to cause life and death. And we see some of that issue going on in the auto industry. And you have to recognize, if this is a life and death situation, no matter what the cost is, you've got to solve the problem right now, not tomorrow. And you have to understand that, and you teach your people that if you get caught breaking the rules, or you get caught taking a payoff, or something that happens a lot in the retail industry, or did happen a lot in the retail, and not today, you have to make sure people understand that's not acceptable, and they have to be terminated on the spot. And the word gets out why they were terminated. And people have to know that there's consequences for breaking the rules. But you have to make sure that you're clear on what those rules are. But I think most people know right and wrong. So I don't think it's something we have to spend a lot of time teaching, but you have to set by example.
You set the tone.
Set the tone by example. And I think that's the most important thing.
Alan, you and Kelly are remarkable in your generosity to the School of Management. What is it that has led you to be so very committed and supportive of your alma mater?
Well, you know, I think that when I look back on it, my wife, and again, as I said, I met my wife in the retail business, so we both are committed to this. And so, as most people know, when you're married, half is yours and half is hers. Half is hers and half is mine. And so that we very much try to understand one another's likes and not likes. But both of us, you know, we've been very successful. And I do not believe I would have been successful in the career I was in if I hadn't come to BU and obviously come in contact with Professor Beckwith. So I think at any time we make a success at something, you try to understand what helped, and then you have a little obligation. Now, I believe that, you know, people who go to BU or go to any school, and if they get their foundation and their grounding at that school or the graduate school, they have and they do well. They want to give back, just like you give to your church, your synagogue. You give back to your university because you want to hope that the school continues to get better, and it continues to attract people like yourself, and that they also get the benefit of the success that you got at that university. And so I think that just an ongoing thing that we believe very strongly, the two of us, that the BU has been good in terms of what we got out of it, and we give back just a portion of that.
Well, thank you. One final question before we wrap up, Alan. Any words of advice you'd have for students that are contemplating their next step, leaving the safety and security of the academic world, entering the real world, shall we say, and striving to get out there and make a difference, create value? What words of advice would you have for our students and soon-to-be graduates?
Yeah, you know, right now, Ken, we're going through a difficult job market, and I had many jobs as a kid growing up. I started working when I was 12 years old. And I would say that you may not have the job that you get your mind set on, but pick about 5 or 6 different industries that you have an interest in. Take the lowest level job that they offer you. Get into that company and try to understand that company and work very hard. Try to understand who's doing well, what makes them successful, emulate them. And if you work hard and you get some good role models, and if you can't find any good role models, you don't want to work there. So you find some good role models, and you watch what makes them successful. You emulate that, and you work hard. You will be successful in that company. But if you don't start off in that job, then you won't be able to know. And so I think it's very important, particularly in this particular situation we're going through, where you may not get the best job. You need to make sure you get a job, because even if you got a job working at a hamburger stand, you're now out on the road. You're out working. It's better than being home. If you're home, you're never going to find a job. So if you're out there, you could find somebody who comes up and thinks you do a good job at the counter and says, "Hey, son, why don't you come and see me? I've got a," and that happens all the time. So if you're not out there, you're not going to find it. So that's what I would say.
Get out there and get your
out there.
hands
And by the way,
yes.
Most everybody, as you know, we just got through celebrating 2 professors, and you look at their resumes and you look at their biographies, and it's this big. They didn't get there just because they wanted to be professors. They had to work very hard. And I would tell you that you look around at all the successful men and women out there, they all work hard. There's no 40-hour-a-week job if somebody's going to make it to the top, whether you're a doctor or a teacher, you know, professor or a businessman. It's a very difficult. There's lots of people out there competing against you. But it's fun.
It is fun indeed.
It is fun.
We've been in conversation with Alan Questrom, distinguished alum of the School of Management at Boston University and Master of Retailing. Thank you for joining us. And Alan, thanks for an inspirational conversation.
I enjoy being with you.
Thank you very much.